Hey everyone, the St. George election this year is incredibly important. Go to votestg.com to see who's running and what they stand for, or visit us at our voter booth at Digby's Market, Red Rock Bicycles, or down in the park.
I've thought about this a lot lately, especially because things get contentious in election season, right? You get some of these differing opinions, right? Flare up emotion, and there's the difference between a peacekeeper and a peacemaker in my mind. It seems like we have a lot of people that want to just say, hey, let's just keep the peace, meaning let's all just get along to get along, and not necessarily say how we feel, but just let's not cause too much of let's not upset the turnip truck, right? Versus a peacemaker saying, hey, I see this perspective and welcome, the differing opinion, welcome the discourse and the conversation between two conflicting sides, and then say, hey, let's come to a resolution.
Absolutely.
Right? And I feel like that's something we're missing out of politicians from the top all the way down, right? From the local government down, which I think is the most emotional, I truthfully, because you see people and you know them personally. There's a lot of, there's typically long relationships that go back in time, and we carry with us animosities or resentments, sometimes rightfully so, in that there were some things that were said or done back in years ago that hurt people's feelings, but we carry that with us. So at the local level, we have a lot of that, but then all the way at the top, we don't get a lot of state or federal level leadership that are looking to make peace and really take leadership roles. I feel like we're really missing that, and this era of politics has gotten so out of whack, at least my opinion.
Right.
And history says, we had better leaders like that, but I also can see how, history doesn't always tell the full story, right? It doesn't always tell the true story of, this person or that person. But I appreciate you saying that. I look up to guys and women and men, but leaders that want to be peacemakers, right? Like, hey, let's get everything all out into the middle, and then let's move forward. Let's come to a consensus. It's a collaboration, but it's also it's a give and take, right? We have to be okay to lose some things. We can't it's got to be a win-win. It can't be a win-lose. Right. And I think this might be a good kind of interesting idea with the GO bond, the general obligation bond, and Parks and Rec raising money for this. What was the feeling back in the 90s when you first kind of presented this idea of raising money for parks? Was there hey, this was an idea from an outsider, and we don't, a protectionist, we don't want to invite people in, tourism? Mm-hmm. Was it a similar conversation then?
Well, let's go back a step.
Okay.
I got to say something before you answer the question.
Fair enough.
We need more public servants and less politicians.
Agreed.
In reality. And let me just say this about Mayor Brooks as I close that conversation out. Essentially, the first time I ever heard this was when he said in city council, he looked out over those who had come to attend, and he said, it's all right to disagree, but there will be no disagreeableness,
Yeah.
And so that, to me, it's really set the stage, and that really is how he handled things. Essentially, is that let's have some open conversation and don't always have to agree, but let's all be thoughtful and kind and those types of things. Anyway, so just to go back a little bit on the history of this, when I moved here, I came from the East Coast, obviously, and so one coast, the other coast, you're still coming from outside,
Yeah.
You were an outsider type of thing. And so somebody asked me, what's the first thing you're going to do, in this new position? And I said, listen. And so it took, some time to be able just to learn the community, to learn the people in the community, to listen and see what kinds of needs were out there. There was another individual, his name was Ira Hodges. And Ira had moved here from the East Coast also. And he was a land planner. And he had brought skills that he had honed for many years to this community. And so we had connected. I had learned that before I even moved out here, I learned that he was out here because someone was related. So I looked him up. We started talking, and before long, we spent a lot of time talking and walking. And we looked at the community. Our goal at that time was not to try to impose, but to determine what is the future of this community. It's not always going to stay at 12,000 people. And of course, when they added Bloomington, it ended up 14 or 15,000 people. But it's going to grow at some point in time. It has to grow. It's on the freeway, the weather thing, et cetera, et cetera. And so we spent a lot of time talking about what could happen in the future. Our goal was the long-term view. Mm-hmm. And so as we continued to do the things that we needed to do as a community, at that point in time, based on our size, et cetera, we wanted to look down the road. And so we started to create a plan. And we actually created 7 plans. We created a trail network plan, a parks plan, a beautification plan, a parks and recreation plan, a special, we called them critical areas plan, which essentially was, and the Mayor Brooks had indicated right along this line, is that as we grow, let's not destroy all the reasons why people came here in the first place.
Yeah.
And so we then started looking at the hillsides and the rivers and everything to try to say, what do we really want to preserve going down the road? When we start to grow, even though at that point in time we hadn't really started to grow very much, what do we want it to look like?
Yeah.
I think Mayor Brooks, again, must have said something like, we need to know what we're going to look like when we grow up, type of thing. And so we put together this plan, and so we went into the city manager and said, here's 7, I think it was 7 plans, might have been 6, plans for the future. Tell us what you think. And he really liked the idea that we were looking down the road. We weren't just doing our day-to-day, but we were looking down the road. And so he said, but that's a lot of plans. Why don't we put them all together into one plan?
Yeah.
So we did. We called it the Critical Areas Plan, and we presented it to City Council. And City Council really bought into it. They thought that this was really terrific. We wanted to, it's the first time the master plan had really been done. And,
Interesting.
And so we took those plans, and the City Council said, you know what, we need to further study this idea. Now, just kind of step back a little bit. Obviously, when we came from the East Coast, there are a lot of communities that have been around for a long time and done a lot of things. And you try to find those kinds of things that maybe could fit here that would be of value to this community, like trails as an example. There are communities back there that have had trail networks for years and years and years. And there was great value in those because it created safe corridors for transportation and recreation and people of all ages, et cetera. So as we looked at that, the council said, we need to study this further. So they created 2 groups. One was the critical areas group, and one was the hillside group, because they wanted to preserve the hillsides, and as some hillsides have been and some haven't been.
Yeah, interesting. Before you keep going, because I think you're right on track. This makes a whole lot of sense. But before we get too far away from this, so the original idea of like a master plan, a long-term plan, that came from within the administrative group, right? So it didn't come from the city council. They didn't come to you and say, hey, we're trying to figure out how do we manage the future down here. It was really the city manager, were you and Hodges. What was his first name? I'm sorry. Ira. You guys kind of had thought, hey, we need to be looking down the road, and you brought it to the city council, and the city council said, hey, this is actually a good idea. We hadn't. Did they say we hadn't considered this, or was it?
I'm not sure I can remember because.
Do you think the conversation was around like looking down the road? Because I'm looking at where we're at right now. We don't have a master plan. We don't. We had one that ended in 2020, And it doesn't seem like we have any. We had this some focus on right downtown, this master plan for downtown, but the rest of the city, it seems
we have a transportation master plan.
Okay.
There is a parks and recreation master plan.
Okay.
And I know that each one of the departments, there's a power long-term plan, there's a water long-term plan, but the water long-term plan, it primarily is driven by the Conservancy District.
Right now, it's got to be a whole group effort when it comes to the water, right?
And so what that expanded out into the I call it the metropolitan area, but
Greater St. George.
There's a greater plan that essentially takes in the majority of this area.
Yeah.
And the cities all buy into that type of thing.
Okay.
So there's a lot of long-term thinking in terms of those kinds of things.
But it really started kind of early on right there in the 80s with you and Ira.
Well, those are there's the water and power and those other kinds of things obviously are thinking down there.
Yep.
But this, from our perspective, this was a focus on open space, trails,
growth,
parks, whatever. And as we perceived it, we'd stand up on the ridges and look out over there and take photographs of nothing.
Yeah.
And think, So we then, as a part of that, we ended up talking to the planning department as an example and said, so let's talk about build out. What, if this community were to build out, what do we want it to look like and stuff?